The internet has accidentally discovered something truly interesting in the Library of Congress. 3 fictional books written at the end of the 19th century draw some coincidental parallels to modern times. Occultists believe it has exposed a conspiracy involving time travel, Keck, and Donald Trump's family. Coupled with rumors that have already existed as early as 2000, suggest a darker conspiracy theory across the ages. The first 2 books, titled Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, written in 1893, and The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger, written a year later. Together they tell the story of Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump, or more commonly called Baron Trump. Now, these books contain some serious coincidences to the world we live in 120 years later, and contain some content that simply doesn't fit anywhere. For example, these books mention giant turtles, alternate dimensions, a battle with a big white crane, a dog named Bulger, and a little smiling man frozen in time. Yet some believe the 19th century author Ingersoll Lockwood wrote in metaphors or was using some artistic interpretation, perhaps in an effort to make sense of information he had about the future. For instance, when he speaks about giant turtles, is this actually a manifestation of a person? Could he be referring to Jeb Bush? This book explores several different multiverses supporting the Bernstein universe theory. Some researchers believe Mike Pence, Donald Trump, and his son have traveled hundreds of multiverse timelines just to bring us to this one, the greatest timeline, in which Donald Trump becomes president and not Hillary Clinton. Other theories suggest Trump or his son have been manipulating the timeline not for profit, but to avoid a future catastrophe. More on that later. In the first 2 books, the boy is an aristocratically wealthy young man living in Castle Trump, who has an unending imagination and a very active brain. Baron is bored of the luxurious lifestyle he has grown accustomed to. One day, his father gives him a manuscript that describes the location of unexplored caves in the Russian Ural Mountains, which is inhabited by a group of people who were chased underground by a terrible disturbance. The manuscript was written by a celebrated thinker and philosopher named the Don. Baron's father refers to Don as a safe and trusty counselor. After a lengthy adventure and interacting with the civilization underground, by the end of the second book, they discover a time machine, and they use it to explore alternative realities and timelines. Ingersoll Lockwood's final book, titled 1900, or The Last President, written in 1896, explores one of these multiverses. The story starts in New York City. The date is November 3rd. New York City is in a state of uproar, following the election of an enormously opposed outsider candidate, the candidate who represents the common man, who would liberate the people from the grip of the bankers and undo the bad business of years of unholy union between barters and sellers of human toil and the lawmakers of the land, otherwise an anti-establishment candidate. The very first page describes New York in turmoil over the announcement. Strange to say, the people in the upper portion of the city made no movement to rush out of their houses and collect in the public squares, although the night was clear and beautiful. They sat as if paralyzed, with a nameless dread, and when they conversed, it was with bated breath and throbbing hearts. With mounted policemen yelling through the streets, "Keep within your houses! Close your doors and barricade them! The entire East Side is in an uproar! Mobs of vast size are organizing under the lead of anarchists and socialists, and threaten to plunder and despoil the houses of the rich who have wronged them for so many years." As the riots advance upon Madison Square, the book reads, "The Fifth Avenue Hotel will be the first to feel the fury of the mob. Would the troops be in time to save it? Trump Tower now sits where the Fifth Avenue Hotel used to stand in 1896. Although the two opponents for president are named Bryan and Altgeld, we can infer that Altgeld is a Democrat, since the book mentions that he wins New York and Illinois, like Clinton, but loses the presidency. Pence is specifically mentioned in the part of the newly elected cabinet under Bryan. The people rally against Wall Street and international finance system. Eventually, the federal government is forced to suppress rebellion in major urban cities as a second civil war erupts. Congress is paralyzed to act due to gridlock and infighting. The only motion gaining traction was a proposal to dismantle the Union by socialist members of Congress. The president is powerless to resist the unrest. During the State of the Union, the President of the United States makes a final attempt to unite the nation in a joint session of Congress. His speech is interrupted by a loud explosion. The dome of the Capitol had been destroyed by dynamite. A few moments later, when it was seen the chamber had suffered no harm, the leader of the House moved for the final passage for the act of dissolution. The president was led away, and the Republican senators and representatives passed slowly out of the disfigured Capitol. The United States had officially been disbanded. The former states now divide between North, South, and West. Even though the president is elected as a populist outsider candidate, the book clearly outlines terrorism committed by anarchists and socialists in response. Major disturbances occur throughout many metropolitan cities. The book notes these protests take place during a rare solar eclipse, which in the context of the book happens in May of 1900. The gridlock in Congress is nothing new, but the socialists appear to have a significant portion of government under their control. When these books were written, the Republicans dominated the House and Senate in 1896 and again in 1900. Yet socialism was on the rise due to the influx of Marxist immigrants from Germany. Clearly, Ingersoll Lockwood wanted to warn against perceived trends in his book, but the parallels to modern times cannot be ignored. These books alone are interesting, but when analyzed in my next video, they unveil some disturbing theories. Until next time. Before the 19th century books were discovered, a rumor was spreading on the internet. On August 17, 2016, a 4chan user made a claim that Donald Trump was in possession of a time machine. In this thread, the user posted the background information about Nikola Tesla and his connection to Donald Trump. 1943, after Tesla's death, the FBI declared all his research to be top secret and ordered all his possessions to be seized. The FBI later appointed an MIT professor to make sense of his notes, to see if any information in them could be used to create military weapons. The MIT professor was none other than John Trump, Donald Trump's uncle.
Today, we have with us an engineer who typifies that American capability of converting great ideas into operating mechanisms that can then be turned over, as it were, to the man in the street for safe and proper use and applications. Only Professor John Trump, who is with us today, did not stop there. Now, when you went to MIT, I believe your original intentions, if they may be so described, was to go into electric power types of applications. Is that right?
That's right. I had become interested in the design of electric power machinery. And he has some wild ideas, but I've checked a few of them and they stood up. For 6 weeks I decided they were plausible and reasonable, and I abandoned the design of electric machinery and began studying the insulation of high voltages in vacuum and the acceleration of heavy particles to high energies.
My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right.
We now know that Tesla was interested and experimented in wild ideas such as wireless electricity, Wi-Fi, free energy, anti-gravity, invisibility, and even time travel. After Tesla's death, John Trump went over Tesla's notes and utilized his discoveries to develop the first million-volt X-ray generators for rotational radiation therapy. Although John Trump thought Tesla's time machine was possible, it could not be created using the technology from that era. John Trump later died in 1985, but not before leaving Tesla's notes to his beloved nephew, Donald Trump. Around at the same time, Trump was using pseudonyms such as John Miller and John Barron in partial homage to his uncle.
Old spokesman, as the Washington Post headline writes, maybe that it's been such an open secret for so long it's hard to believe that anyone is still questioning it.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Barron? Yes, that's correct.
It was back in the 1980s, and when the flashy New York real estate mogul needed to get a bit of news out, the newspaper reports it was common knowledge among New York reporters that Trump just assumed a different name and handled the media calls himself.
I can conclude with a fair degree of scientific certainty that it is Donald Trump's voice.
This afternoon, Owens compared the John Miller on that phone call with People magazine to the real Donald Trump interviewed on CNN's Larry King Live in the 1990s. Due to the quality of the old recordings, he couldn't use his biometric analysis that he says would be absolutely certain, but based on pitch, tone, cadence, and his expertise, John Miller and Donald Trump are one and the same.
Yes, it's my opinion that it is Donald Trump's voice.
Now it's suggesting that you misled us.
Yeah, that I'm lying. I'm not lying.
His denial was, that doesn't sound like me. It's interesting, because if somebody called me up and said, did you call and pretend to be your own PR person, I would say, no, I never did. I have never done something like that, ever. I wouldn't say that doesn't sound like me.
Right.
So you don't believe him. Were you surprised to see him misleading?
No, I'm not surprised to see him misleading. Of course not. I mean, I would probably be a little shocked that, this came into my life. But, Megyn, the main thing here is that I didn't leak the tape. And there were two people on the conversation.
Wait, you taped it because you're a reporter doing your job?
Yeah, and I lost the tape.
Were you the only one with a copy of the tape?
Yes.
When did you lose it?
Back 25 years ago.
Could somebody have stolen it?
No. It was in my house, and then I moved apartments.
So who else would have had a copy of the tape?
Donald Trump.
Wait a minute. So you're suggesting Trump leaked this to the Washington Post?
Yes.
Why?
You got me. He's done stranger things.
Because he loves publicity?
Yeah.
So you're suggesting that he may want us talking about this right now because it generates a news cycle, perhaps?
Hello, Donald.
These names would be exposed during his 2016 presidential campaign run. However, there was another pseudonym Trump used that isn't well known: John Titor. Titor, in particular, is of special interest to this conspiracy.
Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Oliver, just give us an overview of who John Titor was.
Sure. John Titor, actually, I just took a look at the calendar, and it's going to be exactly 10 years ago, November 2nd, that somebody claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2036 went on a series of internet forums claiming to be a time traveler. And they offered to answer questions. They talked about the future, about technology, how time travel worked. And for a period of 3 months, this person answered questions, and then they announced that they were going to leave. And this is March of 2001. This person announced that they were leaving, and they were never heard from again. And I think the reason why we're here talking about it 10 years later is because a lot of what this person said, people feel has come to pass. Talking about the physics and the technology and the politics, we're here and I'm here because some of the things that this person said sure made it sound like they really were who they said they were, a time traveler.
Making claims as early as November of 2000 to be a time traveler from the year 2036. Titor spoke of events that happened in his native timeline onto an obscure internet discussion board, posting several warnings for personal reasons. Answering questions directed toward him, He even posted several pictures showing the instruction manual and the time device, manufactured by General Electric, in the back of his 1967 Chevrolet. There are rumors he even faxed messages to various radio hosts like Art Bell of Coast to Coast AM, warning of the impending future. He spoke of terrible events that would occur from early 2000 through 2012, leading to war. He did not name Islamic terrorism, but mentioned that a skyscraper would vanish in New York, not speaking specifically because the timeline was often in flux.
But one of the predictions that this person made in the fax, he said that in New York, there's a skyscraper missing. He says, where I'm from, in my time, there's a skyscraper that's missing. This is 1998, so 9/11 had not happened here. So a lot of people point to that as John trying to, signal that, hey, I am who I say I am, and you're not going to realize it until the year 2001.
BuzzFeed dug up an old quote from Donald Trump talking about a large-scale terror attack 19 months before 9/11. In his 2000 book, The America We Deserve, Trump wrote, "I really am convinced we're in danger of the sort of terrorist attacks that will make the bombing of the 1993 Trade Center look like little kids playing with firecrackers." Trump also mentioned the mastermind of the attack, writing, quote, "One day, we're told that a shadowy figure with no fixed address named Osama bin Laden is public enemy number one, and U.S. jet fighters lay waste to his camp in Afghanistan. He escapes back under some rock, and a few news cycles later, it's on to a new enemy and a new crisis." Trump.
Wait.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
Is this really Trump before 9/11? Have you read this?
It's 2000 in his book.
Are we making this? Did you make this up, Mika?
Nick.
Titter said he had to be extremely cautious and analyze the future infinite temporal variables and possibilities before making his move. Sometimes greater disasters can be triggered with the best intentions. In his timeline, the United States gets involved in a civil war that ends with a limited nuclear exchange between Russia, China, and factions within the United States. He does not view Russia as an enemy, however, but that the rebels in the metropolitan cities were the cause of the war, and Russia acted in behest of another American faction. The United States recovers, but the world is irrevocably changed from the one we currently exist in.
So what was John's future like? I mean, what did he say about the year 2036?
The year 2036, according to John, was a period where the Earth, nations, countries, states were recovering from a third global war, which was a nuclear war. And he talked specifically about events in the United States. He said a civil war led up to this, which started in around he says the seeds of it were there in the year 2004 and 5, but then the actual conflict started in about 2008, and then people started shooting each other around 2010. He said that by 2013, the world would be engulfed in this, and there was a nuclear war, a period of nuclear war, and then a period of recovery.
The date for this war was supposed to have taken place in 2015, with nearly 3 billion deaths worldwide. Time travel is developed years after the conflict. Titter says on one internet post that when he visited a 20th century supermarket, he was amazed with the amount of food available. Yet he was disgusted with how people treated one another in our time. People don't distrust strangers or the homeless. In his timeline, there was much more compassion despite the poverty. Titter admitted that he came from a wealthy family and never went to bed hungry in his community, but that wasn't the case elsewhere. Titter originally traveled to the past to recover artifacts and information from our timeline to benefit his own.
So he came from the year 2036, but what was his mission originally?
He claimed to be part of a military group whose job it was to go back to the year 1975 and get a small personal computer. It was one of the first portable computers made by IBM, and it was in Rochester, Minnesota. And he claimed that they needed this computer in the future because it had the ability to communicate between very large old mainframe IBM systems and other systems that they had. I guess there was some special trick or technical issue inside this computer that allowed it to talk, I think it was BASIC, APL, and system language, but it could all be done in this one computer, and it was portable, and that's why they needed it. Now, at the time, nobody really paid too much attention to it, but this is one of the things that got me was after this person was gone, after he left, some IBM engineers came forward and said, I don't know if that guy was a time traveler or not, but everything he said about that machine is true. And maybe only 20 people knew about it because it was a marketing issue at the time that they didn't want people to know that the machine was that versatile because then it would have diminished their business. So they kept that under wraps. So at the time, there was only about 20 people that knew that this machine could do it. And, apparently John Titor was one of them, or he really was a time traveler.
Imagine that this line represents time. Here's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
20% accurate as usual, Morty.
Time, as Titor explains it, is not a straight line, but a network of strings of different possibilities. Two timelines can be identical and exist in the same moment if their variable is 0%. Another can be slightly different or exist at different dates with less than 1% variance. The further you travel in time, the more things change in this variance due by the limitations of his device. It is impossible to return to the time you originally leave from. Due to the multiverse, there's a high probability that another version of you will arrive in your timeline. Because of this instability, there's a chance that a series of events will not unfold quite as they did in another universe, even without interference from a time traveler. According to the 4chan poster, Baron, or a future version of him, exists in our time as a traveler. He has been gathering information, using it to manipulate our timeline by making subtle changes. He has been helping his father amass fame and fortune over the decades, and is guiding him in some of the decision-makings. This intervention was intended to help prevent the future he originally came from. The 2015 prediction has failed due to these interventions, but the time traveler fears that it may only have been delayed. He also mentioned that Mike Pence plays a role in all of this. He is one of many clones from a point much further in time. He also mentioned enemies in this timeline that have not yet been dealt with. The 4chan poster went on to explain the causes of the Mandela effect, deja vu, and other temporal errors perceived by the brain. Time travel, especially rudimentary ones, are not without side effects. He then insinuates Clinton's bizarre health conditions in 2016 to be part of it. The Chan poster insinuates there are other agents working against Trump right now in sort of a temporal Cold War. Trump and Clinton have a long relationship with one another as representatives of these two factions. The secret organizations that surround the Clintons will be explored in a future video. Finally, it should be noted near the end of the thread that the 4chan user reluctantly admits to being the future Baron Trump. His family is well aware of the role the Chans played during the 2016 election and the connection to a certain Egyptian god named Kek. More on that later. Make no mistake, there are no coincidences to Trump's use of memes to propel his candidacy. Some have now started to even question whether the White House Anon, a White House leaker who has posted some startling predictions about Trump and the media, may have also been Baron Trump. The leaker accurately predicted the date and time when the media would report on information regarding the Russian and Mueller investigation. The leaker unveiled that Mueller hired a lawyer who had looked into the Clinton email matter. that Loretta Lynch had approved the visa for the Russian lawyer that met with Trump Jr., as well as the administration's response to these news reports. The question remains, did Trump or his son go back in time and awaken Keck by accident to receive his blessing, or did Trump create Keck because he knows that memetics are what holds timelines together? In this final video, we'll be exploring the specific details of Barron Trump's time travels from all the sources we have available. Barron Trump was born March 20th, 2006. In the year 2015, or at a later date depending on the reality, civil unrest breaks out in the United States. In all cases mentioned by Titter, Barron, or Ingersoll Lockwood, the war is triggered by socialists from the urban cities in response to the election of an outsider. As the war escalates, the Capitol building is destroyed, and the United States fractures between North, South, and West. According to Titter, Russia intervenes on behalf of one element within America. The Civil War becomes a global conflict as China involves itself and a limited nuclear exchange occurs. By the end of the conflict, over 3 billion lives are lost due to the war, starvation, and disease. Titter claims the rebels are defeated by the Russian-American side. Civilization recovers despite this war, although it's unrecognizable by today's standards. Trump's family survives this conflict and thrives financially. Many years later, Barron Trump travels to the Ural Mountains in Russia to visit a community that went underground during the war to explore their cave network. According to the 19th century books, it was during this exploration that Barron discovers a time portal and is able to travel to alternate realities. The origins of this time machine are unknown, although it is believed to be a crude prototype. Sometime afterwards, the technology is perfected using the notes left behind by Nikola Tesla and John Trump. Barron finances engineers from General Electric to develop a working time machine. Since Barron had the most experience with the prototype and for financing the development, Trump is chosen to go back in time to conduct research. During one of his travels, it's possible Barron met Ingersoll Lockwood in the late 19th century. John Titter admitted to traveling across time for research before he made contact with his father. We don't know why he shared his adventures with the struggling author. Perhaps Barron felt sorry for the lawyer-turned-author. Regardless of the motivation, it shows Barron was willing to do more than just simple research. Lockwood was clearly inspired by the information given to him by Barron. Looking beyond the artistic license of his interpretation of events, we have a glimpse into Barron's life before the time machine. It's not clear when the time traveler made first contact with Donald Trump. It's reasonable to assume Trump would not at first believe a random man claiming to be his unborn son from the future, as any of us wouldn't either. Perhaps this began to change when Barron mentioned things about the family that's not public knowledge.
You gotta listen to me.
I got enough practical jokes for one evening. Good night, future boy.
No, wait, Doc, the bruise in your head. I know how that happened. You told me the whole story. You were standing on your toilet and you were hanging a clock and you fell and you hit your head on the sink. And that's when you came up with the idea for the flux capacitor, which is what makes time travel possible.
Barron instructed his father to look into Tesla's notes left behind by his uncle and compare it with artifacts brought back from the future. Trump listened and eventually agreed to travel with Barron in his time machine. One of the first places they visited was ancient Egypt. This is where he began to understand timelines, Keck, memetics, and how he could have an impact on them, according to the 4chan poster. When Trump returned to his own time, he began to use these experiences to accumulate wealth and fame under Barron's watchful guidance. If it has ever seemed to you that Trump has a bizarre ability to accurately predict and manipulate his opponents to his advantage, it may not be a coincidence. The truth is, there are foreordained events. Yes, there have been setbacks like Trump filing Chapter 7 for his casinos, but the legacies of these bankruptcies have made an impact on millions of people in those communities. What may appear to be a negative for Trump's empire may have been a positive in ways we're not aware of. Suppose a man and woman were to meet at the Plaza Hotel in Atlantic City in 2005, fall in love, get married, and have a child. This child eventually grows up to be the next Adolf Hitler. However, in our timeline, the Plaza Hotel closed their doors in 1992 due to Trump's bankruptcy. This couple never meets, therefore, our history is saved without the public knowing otherwise. However, one of Trump's biggest regrets, according to the 4chan poster, was 9/11. Despite his best efforts to warn people as John Titor, he was ultimately unable to prevent the terror attack. You see, Trump could not raise the alarm bells without arousing suspicion. The terror attacks flew under the radar of the FBI and CIA. How would Trump receive his intel when our intelligence services could not? Would he not be investigated for uncovering such a deadly attack? Keep in mind, Trump's ultimate mission is to avoid the nuclear war his future son foretold. Ultimately, Trump's goals cannot jeopardize or disrupt Barron's mission. In 1980, Trump attempted to purchase the World Trade Center when he was 33 years old.
Scrape up a down payment for a little fixer-upper in your neighborhood? Take a look at my next guest. There's a report around Wall Street that this is what he has in mind. This is Donald Trump, 33 years old, and some people think that he wants to buy the World Trade Center, the 110-story Manhattan skyscraper that anyone can pick up if they've got the coins. Donald Trump, as I say, is just 33 years old. He took his father's rather modest by current standards real estate empire in Brooklyn and expanded it considerably. He now has an apartment for sale in a new Trump building called the Trump Tower, going up on 5th Avenue. There it is.
Trump designed plans to remodel the building to sustain terror attacks. Unfortunately, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey scaled back its intent to sell the building outright and opted to only sell the rights to its name, and did so by 1986 to Guy F. Tozzoli for $10 million. The opportunity never presented itself again. Donald Trump was originally against the notion of running for president, believing he could preserve our timeline from the shadows.
This sounds like political presidential talk to me, and I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
Probably not, but I do get tired of seeing the country ripped off.
Why would you not?
I just don't think I really have the inclination to do it. I love what I'm doing. I really like it.
Also, it doesn't pay as well.
No, it doesn't.
In 1987 on Larry King, and again in 1988 on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Trump said he was not inclined to run, but would only do it if the country were in such a mess. These sentiments began to change after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. It soon became clear that there was another party influencing the timeline besides Barron. The most terrifying aspect of the 4chan posts were the cryptic references that there are other agents working against Trump on behalf of the Clintons. Trump's first attempt to defeat her happened in the late 90s. To be specific, Trump hatched a plan to shame and discredit her husband so that she would not be able to run for public office. While the plan succeeded in some regard, a temporal incursion by Hillary from the future prevented any lasting damage. The Clintons moved to New York to start working on her political career. In the same year of 2000, Trump announced his intent to run for president under the Reform Party, but the campaign never went beyond the exploratory phase. Trump and Clinton, as representatives of their temporal agents, attempted to smooth relations over. The Clintons attended Trump's wedding with Ivanka in 2005, and later Trump attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding soon thereafter. But this was a ruse. we really must analyze the motivation behind Clinton's affiliates. Not all of Trump's enemies in this timeline have been dealt with. If Barron's mission was to prevent a civil war from turning into a nuclear holocaust, then we must assume Clinton's allies won a confrontation that ends in their victory. Yet we must remember that Russia and the conservatives win this confrontation in Barron's timeline. They must change the outcome of any conflict that arises. What's the current narrative in regards to Russia today?
That Russian officials and even Vladimir Putin ordered a cyber campaign to help President Trump. But one thing that they've been struggling to find is the issue of collusion, whether there has been any so far between Russian officials and Trump officials, because there are a lot of leads and a lot of questions that they have yet to answer.
A civil war with the globalists supporting the socialist rebels without Russia backing the conservatives would be a crushing blow for the right, eliminating Barron Trump's timeline altogether. The 2008 election was an important year. There's speculation that perhaps Clinton was supposed to win the 2008 election, with Trump defeating her re-election efforts in 2012. The rage from the left against Trump could have boiled over into an all-out civil war. In this scenario, the nuclear confrontation of 2015 would have been fulfilled as John Titor predicted. Luckily, this didn't happen. The only candidate who ran in 2008 who didn't want a war with Russia was Barack Obama. John McCain and Hillary Clinton have proven themselves to be extremely hostile towards the Russians. Again, in 2012, Mitt Romney called Russia the greatest geopolitical threat of the 21st century.
What's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America? You said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda. You said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
Russia, I indicated, is a geopolitical foe.
All the options.
What do you think of that option, sir?
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia. That's a pretty fundamental decision that certainly I'm not going to make.
So I, when I was Secretary of State, advocated, and I advocate today, a no-fly zone and safe zones.
How much of a threat to global security do you consider the Russian President Vladimir Putin?
I think he is the premier and most important threat, more so than ISIS.
Despite Trump and Obama being diametrically opposed to one another on every single issue, there was no reason for Trump to win in 2012 and accidentally trigger the war without Clinton. Obama's presidency certainly pushed our timeline into uncharted territory, as it's unknown if the events are preordained and only delayed. Instead of a nuclear war in 2015, there was the Great Meme War that took its place, culminating in the resurrection of an ancient Egyptian deity by internet wizards. Soon, meme magic would decide the 2016 presidential election. Despite the best efforts by the temporal agents and occultists to stop Trump, he would go on to win the White House by defeating Hillary Clinton once and for all. Oh, but that's not the final chapter of the Great Meme Wars. Seth Rich uncovered the surface layer of information involving the DNC and was assassinated by Podesta's temporal agents for leaking vital information to WikiLeaks. In fact, many Clinton enemies have had mysterious deaths that were covered up. Vince Foster, who committed suicide with 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head. Gareth Williams, who committed suicide by stuffing his naked body into a duffel bag, and various other strange circumstances. Although there has been no nuclear war, the temporal Cold War continues to lurk in the shadows. If you enjoyed this work, and you'd like for me to do voice work for you, contact Ron Miller at mybasevoice.com.